Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So welcome to the beginning of this year's winter retreat Dhamma readings. The book we'll be starting with this year is Vol.2 of the Ajahn Sumedho anthology. This is entitled Seeds of Understanding. And in previous years, 2014, I read the first book and up to a few parts of this Volume 2. And then in 2019, I again did similar, but we didn't get past chapter 12 of Volume 2 before, and so that's where we will begin. And this first few parts are an interview with somebody called Roger Wheeler. This was done in 1981, so 40 years ago. Probably one or two of you weren't even born then. So this is back in the early days of Luang Por Sumedho teaching in the West. And Roger Wheeler had been a gelong, a monk in the Tibetan tradition at the Tarpa Churling Center in Switzerland. Luang Por Sumedho was invited to teach in Switzerland pretty much every year from the late 70s through the early 80s. And on one of those occasions, he was invited to teach at Tarpa Churling, where Geshe Rabten was the Tibetan Lama who was the teacher there. And Roger Wheeler was a monk. He might have been a novice or a monk, I'm not sure, but he was in robes there, as I understand it. And then a few years later, he met with Luang Por Sumedho again at IMS in Barre, Massachusetts. And that's where this interview was carried out. And I thought this was also a good place to start, just quite by chance, coincidentally, because for a number of people here have probably never met Luang Por Sumedho or only familiar with him and his teachings in a more sort of cursory way, maybe listening to more recent Dhamma talks. But there's a lot in this set of interviews. It's in 6 parts, so it goes on for it'll go on for a few days. A lot of Luang Por Sumedho's background, his own sort of spiritual influences, and a fairly wide range of considerations with respect to spiritual life. And as we go along, it'll become clear that Roger Wheeler had a few questions about the nature of religious form, the skillful use of religious form. So along the way, he quotes a few passages from Krishnamurti. And also there's a fair amount in here about Luang Por speaking about skillful use of the Vinaya tradition and religious structures as a skillful means. So this is chapter 13 of Volume 2 of the Ajahn Sumedho anthology. Interview with Roger Wheeler. So this is Roger Wheeler speaking first of all as a little introduction. I first met Ajahn Sumedho at the Center for Higher Tibetan Studies in Switzerland in spring 1979. He had just finished giving a 10-day course in the mountains near Bern and was invited to spend a couple of days at the center by its abbot, Geshe Rabten. One person who attended Bhikkhu Sumedho's course liked to be around him because he was, quote, just such a nice guy. It was heartening for me to see a monk who kept the rules of discipline, the Vinaya, strictly, yet maintained a softness and naturalness behind his observance of them. To illustrate Ajahn Sumedho's resoluteness about the importance of practice and meditation, while we were walking on the hillside near the center, overlooking the French and Swiss Alps with Lake Geneva below, he asked me whether I had a desire to return to India. I answered that I would go if it was for the purpose of improving my Tibetan. I could then return to the West and act as an interpreter for a Tibetan master, or work as a translator of Tibetan texts. His only response to that was, "Why don't you just get enlightened?" It's one of Luang Por's direct teachings. When Ajahn Sumedho, Ajahn is the Thai equivalent of the Sanskrit Acharya or master, when he came to the Insight Meditation Society in May of 1981, he conducted an 8-day work retreat. Now, to give a little bit of a background to that, so 1981, Luang Por Sumedho taught his first 10-day retreat in 1978. He'd never taught a retreat before he came to the West, which was in May of 77. And so this was only about 3 years after he first started doing retreat teaching. And part of the thinking behind this work retreat was because as Luang Por Sumedho had come to the West and was encountering different meditation groups, like say IMS Massachusetts, or this was before Gaia House existed, but there was a place called Oak Tree House in Sussex near I think Amberley. Or Arundel, in the sort of vague region where Chithurst is now, in that sort of Sussex area. And the kind of meditation centres that existed were very much based on the Mahasi tradition or the Goenka tradition, and there was this very much a strong focus on this is the practice, and the retreat form is the practice, and anything else is not really the practice, and that is kind of what you have to do with your life in order to be able to go on retreat and really practice. So one of the ideas, and I remember I was around at Chithurst when this was being talked about, and when Ajahn Sumedho had suggested it, was that he wanted to try and bring into the group consciousness of people at IMS, who are very much focused on the retreat model of, you could practice together and live together and work together, and that is equally as effective and productive of wisdom and spiritual benefit. So he agreed to teach a retreat at IMS, but it needed to be a work retreat. That was the basis on which he agreed to teach there on this particular occasion. And so that it was trying to, in a sense, create that kind of a bridge that's very much a part of our life in the Ajahn Chah tradition and how we live here at Amaravati. So that we certainly do have retreats, like right now, and there's say an encouragement towards formal practice, but the attitude is not that the real practice equals retreat and the rest is not real practice, but rather the teaching is given in the spirit that all the different modes of our life, whether we're working and engaging in activities around the monastery, or whether we're sitting quietly in the temple or doing walking meditation, the practice continues regardless. So that was the basis behind the 8-day work retreat that he was leading. So to continue. As the following interview will show, nothing special is cultivated in the meditation. No particular technique is taught. One's only responsibility is to remain mindful in all activities throughout the day. Quote, "Live simply, be natural, and watch the mind," which is a statement of Luang Por Chah's. Live simply, be natural, and watch the mind are the keys to his practice. During the retreat, the students performed various tasks around the center for 2 hours every afternoon. Some painted, some cleaned the building, others worked in the garden. We chanted prayers every morning and evening, and I was rather surprised to see how the 25 participants, most of whom were new to meditation, so quickly and easily adapted to the bowing and ceremony that the 2 monks, Sumedho and the young English monk Sujito, who accompanied him, asked them to perform. So the young English monk Sujito. So this was 40 years ago. So, and it's also interesting, I feel, in that IMS can accommodate 100 retreatants. So only 25 people had signed up for this. And also it said, most of whom were new to meditation, so that it seems like the kind of real meditators didn't sign up for this work retreat because it was, again, I'm guessing a little bit, but they wouldn't be so interested in something that's not a quote-unquote real retreat. That's just my guesswork, projection, but that's what I read into that format. That 25 is quite a small number for a retreat at IMS, in my experience. Ajahn Sumedho inspired the retreatants with his 3 daily impromptu talks and casually spent his lunch hour and the 1.5-hour tea break willingly answering their questions about Dhamma practice and entertaining them with stories about monastic life in Thailand. What was most encouraging for me was to see that there are monks who have the determination and the motivation to maintain the purity of a tradition. I appreciated Ajahn Sumedho's humour and patience with my persistent questions concerning organised religion. His views on the values of tradition and monastic life enabled me to see this matter from a different perspective. And also just a footnote, when living at Chithurst in those early days, there was often 2 or 3 talks from Ajahn Sumedho every day, at morning reflection, and then sometimes after the mealtime, and then pretty much a Dhamma talk every single evening. That was the regular format of the life at Chithurst in those early days, so that it was a very rich Dhamma goldmine, really. It was a rich seam that was being mined at that time and shared with everyone. So then the interviews start. Firstly, Roger Wheeler asking, what attracted you to Buddhism? What did you feel it had to offer? Luang Por responds, the path of liberation. Had you tried other paths or methods as well? Luang Por responds, at one time I was quite a devout Christian, but I later became disillusioned with Christianity, mainly because I didn't understand the teachings and was not able to find anyone who could help me to comprehend them. There did not seem to be any way to practice Christianity other than just believing or blindly accepting what was said. What impressed me about Buddhism was that it did not ask one to merely believe. It was a way where one was free to doubt. It offered a practical way of finding out the truth through one's own experience, rather than through accepting the teachings of other people. I realized that was the way I had to do it, because it's my nature to doubt and to question, rather than to believe. Therefore, religions that asked one to accept on faith were simply out. I couldn't even begin to get near them. When I discovered Buddhism, it was like a revelation for me, since I saw that one's religious inclinations could be fulfilled in this way. Previously, I'd felt a sense of sorrow because I knew the material world was not satisfactory for me, and yet the religion I'd been brought up in offered no way of practice other than just blind faith. Buddhism was quite a joyous discovery. And then it says, as a footnote, Ajahn Sumedho mentioned being inspired by D.T. Suzuki's books and having encountered Buddhism in Japan whilst in the Navy during the Korean War. So then Roger goes on to ask, upon completion of your naval service, did you remain in California or did you return to Asia? And then Luang Por responds, after I left the Navy, I went back to the University of Washington to finish my bachelor's degree in Far Eastern Studies, and then went to the University of California at Berkeley for an MA in Asian Studies. When I completed that in 1963, I went into the Peace Corps. And as Luang Por often mentions, and again, some of you might know this, some of you might not, he'd started his degree at the University of Washington was in Chinese language. And he did that because when he was young, he had a great love of China. He wanted to go and study in China, and he was very keen to join up. They had a program at St. John's University in, I think, Shanghai in China. And but then when China became communist in 1949, then the doors closed, and he was really upset or disappointed at that. But the University of Washington in Seattle, where he was living, where he grew up, fortunately had an Asian Studies department, and so he learned Chinese language there at the University of Washington. He also fell in love with a young woman there who was Asian, and when his parents refused to allow them to get married on the basis of quote-unquote, God doesn't want the races to be mixed, he took a leave of absence from the university and joined the Navy, went to sea to get away from everything. So that was why there was a break in his degree. And he often mentions that was the background to that. So he did 4 years in the U.S. Navy as a medic on the supply ships. I think it was actually after the Korean War rather than during it. He was on the ships going back and forth across the Pacific and going from the west coast of America to Japan. And so then after 4 years of that, then he could pick up his degree, and he finished that degree in Chinese studies. So he's pretty much lost his Chinese language now, but one of the reasons when he joined the Peace Corps was he went to teach in Borneo, because there was quite a large Chinese population in Borneo, and so he taught at a school for Chinese children in Borneo when he was in the Peace Corps. So then Roger goes on to ask, what attracted you to Thailand more than to Japan, for example, where Suzuki's teachings originated? And Luang Por responds, well, I was in that part of the world. Also, I remembered the cold winters of Japan. Since Thailand had such a nice sunny climate, I felt I might as well see what it had to offer, because I dreaded having to live through those cold winters. And he often said he knew that in Zen monasteries they didn't heat them in the wintertime, and there was icy cold, and so he thought that Thailand and Southeast Asia had a lot more of an attractive appeal. There was one time at the Buddhist Society summer school when they would have a Zen group, a Tibetan group, and a Theravada group. And the different teachers would take it in turns to teach in the evening. And the lead Zen teacher was Myokyoni, and she had a large crowd of very, very dedicated disciples. And she was a very sort of strict Rinzai Zen master. And they knew also that Ajahn Sumedho had started out reading D.T. Suzuki and was inspired by Zen Buddhism. And when he gave a talk at the evening at this Buddhist Society summer school, about 120 people gathered there, and so somebody asked the question, Venerable Sumedho, why was it that you chose Theravada Buddhism rather than Zen Buddhism, since that was where your faith arose in the Dhamma? And you could feel the room sort of tighten, like, oh, this is going to be nasty. There was going to be a kind of Theravada Mahayana face-off. But he said exactly the same thing. He said, well, I've been to Japan in the wintertime, and I knew how freezing cold it got. And I knew they didn't heat those endos. And because I was afraid of the cold, I went to sunny Thailand instead. So it really changed the atmosphere in the room. So one of those extremely skillful gestures of Luang Por. And it was absolutely true as well. He wasn't fibbing. It was the truth, but it also helped to sort of there wasn't so much a doctrinal difference as a fear of the cold. In time, he actually, having lived here in England, he became enamoured of the English winters. But at that time, he was drawn to sunny Thailand. So he goes on to ask, "Did you immediately go to Ajahn Chah's monastery?" Luang Por responds, no. I went first to Bangkok, where I practiced meditation as a layman. During the mornings, I taught English at Thammasat University, and in the afternoons, I went off to practice meditation. I later decided to become a monk, but I didn't want to live in Bangkok because I didn't find it very suitable for me. While I was on vacation in Laos, I met a Canadian monk who recommended that I get ordained in a Thai town across the Mekong River. So I followed his advice and went forth as a samanera at a temple in Nong Khai. So at that part of the Mekong River, Vientiane, which is the capital of Laos, is on one side of the river, and Nong Khai is on the Thai side. So Vientiane is on the east side, and Nong Khai is on the west side, sort of across from each other. So that this Canadian monk in Vientiane recommended a monastery in Nong Khai. And then Luang Por goes on. So I followed his advice and went forth as a samanera at a temple in Nong Khai. That year I mainly practiced on my own, without a teacher. The following year, I met a disciple of Ajahn Chah, a Thai monk who spoke English. He took me to meet Ajahn Chah. Roger says, and you remained at Ajahn Chah's monastery for 10 years? Yes. So again, some of you will be familiar with the story of that, but some not. So in northeast Thailand at that time, it was extremely rare to meet anybody who spoke English. This was 1966, 67. It would have been maybe early 67. And let alone a Thai monk who spoke English. But this particular monk, Prat Somai, had been in the Thai Navy during the Korean War and had picked up some English. So it was an extremely strange circumstance, very, very fortunate that not only was he a monk from Wat Pah Pong, but he was a monk who's probably the only monk from Wat Pah Pong who spoke any English. Happened to come to that monastery. And he was back in Nong Khai because he was attending a family funeral. And so then he was the one that took Luang Por Sumedho to Ajahn Chah. So Luang Por always had a great debt of gratitude, a sense of gratitude for Prat Somai, who was being the one who made that connection for him. The next question from Roger. You mentioned that it was the doubting aspect of Buddhism that attracted you to it. One was able to doubt. It very often happens that people are attracted to the Tibetan tradition because of the personality or wisdom of the teacher. Does the teacher have such a significant role in the Theravada tradition? Luang Por responds, no. They try to de-emphasize that, but people are often attracted to teachers, which is very natural. However, the discipline itself is arranged so that one does not adore a teacher. One keeps within the discipline by respectful attitudes and compassionate actions towards any teacher or anyone. I was not really looking for a teacher. I didn't have the feeling that I needed a particular kind of teacher, but I had confidence in the Buddha's teaching. When I met Ajahn Chah, my confidence in him grew when I realized what a wise man he was. At first I liked him, but I didn't feel any great devotion. But I stayed there, and I really don't know why, because there were many things I didn't like about the place. But I just seemed to stay there for 10 years. Roger asks, how would Ajahn Chah instruct his disciples? Ajahn Chah set up a monastery which provided the opportunity for people to be ordained and practice Buddhist meditation. So, what he mainly offers is a place, a conducive environment. The teaching itself is just the traditional Buddhist teaching of the Four Noble Truths. He adheres to the Vinaya discipline. Part of the agreement to live there is that the monks adapt their behavior to the traditional discipline. I felt that was very much what I needed. It was an opportunity to live under a convention of that kind. My background was very permissive and freewheeling, and I realized that was a great weakness in my nature. I resented authority and didn't know how to conform to discipline in any way. So I was quite glad to have the opportunity to do that. It was a good challenge for me, and I knew that that was what I needed to do. Much conceit still existed in me, wanting to live on my own terms. Ajahn Chah was very strict, and we had to live on the terms established by the monastery. I learned to do that there. Ajahn Chah does not stress method. He stresses just being aware during the day and night, being mindful and watching the impermanence of conditions as one experiences life. During the first year, while I was in Bangkok, I meditated alone. Since I understood the meditation technique, but when I went to Wat Pah Pong, Ajahn Chah just encouraged me to keep doing what I had learned in Bangkok. He didn't demand that I adapt my behavior to any particular form or technique other than the Vinaya discipline of the monks. So going back to that point about the kind of central position or the devotion towards the teacher, I think Luang Por puts it very, very well here. But it was also in some monasteries the teacher does say allow or even encourage a greater sense of devotion. But Ajahn Chah in particular tended to push that away and kept. And people were naturally very drawn to him, very inspired and glad to be around him. But his constant theme was, "Don't look at me, look at yourself. Don't obsess with me. It's not me that's going to make the difference. It's you." And so that, and if someone was particularly sort of gushy or attached, then they would be pushed away more vigorously or sent off to a difficult branch monastery, or get made fun of in public, or something to cool their ardor a little bit. But it was very much with the intent to not to make it into a personality cult. Interestingly, I was doing an interview with Luang Por Sumedho for the history book they're putting together for Wat Pananachat, and similarly, he spoke in a very, very similar way, how that it wasn't the personality or the kind of star quality of Ajahn Chah that appealed to him. In fact, he said that he found that a bit off-putting. His background in theatre had made him a bit wary of that sort of anybody being held up as a star. But what really drew him was the way of practice, and that was what I found as well. And I feel that's one of the great skills of Luang Por Chah as a teacher, and why it has been something that's been so successful and has being able to carry its form into many, many different countries and cultures. And that, and Ajahn Chah would spell that out over and over again. It's the monastery that's the teacher, not me. The monastery environment is what teaches us if we are ready to learn, and so that. Yes, the person at the center, it's their job to help sustain that environment, but really it's the monastery environment that is the real teacher, and then it's up to each individual to use that environment to the best of their ability. And I feel that's such a powerful and helpful principle. Also, those of you who've been listening closely will have noticed that Luang Por Sumedho is talking in the present tense. What he mainly offers, present tense. Ajahn Chah does not stress method, he stresses just being aware during the day and night. Ajahn Chah was still actively teaching when this interview happened. 1981, it was before his health collapsed, so he was still actively teaching. And this was in May of 81, and Ajahn Sumedho had been back in January, February of 81 to see Ajahn Chah in Thailand for the first time since Chithurst had been established in England, and so that he had just really come fresh from Luang Por Chah's company, and so that it was so prior to the whole collapse of Luang Por's health and him no longer being able to teach in an active way. So there's a poignancy in that I find for myself. So please, there's a couple of microphones up here. So please, if anyone has any questions you'd like to ask, that's the end of the first part of the interview. So please come and get a microphone and ask a question if you have one. Don't be shy. Please give Gaspar some exercise. No? No doubts?
Ajahn Amaro, it's actually the first time I heard the story that Luang Por was, I guess, heartbroken from a Chinese girl that he had to leave to the Navy. I never heard.
She was Japanese.
Oh, Japanese. So, is there any more of that?
She was Japanese. Yeah. It was really painful for him that they'd fallen in love. They were quite young. I think he was about 19. And in those days, in the 1950s, that would have been 1953, 52, 53. Getting married at 19 or 20 was not unusual. It's a bit more rare nowadays in the West. But and his parents put their foot down and said, "No, we don't approve." And in those days, again, it was the 1950s. That was 70 years ago. If you were a good child, you didn't go against the wishes of your parents. And so things have changed a lot in the West, in particular, in subsequent decades. But they put their foot down, and so he was really heartbroken. And so then I think just as a way of breaking out of the situation, and just, I don't think he could imagine carrying on at the university. You can ask him when he comes. I'm sure you will. I'm not sure. I suspect you will. But I think just to get out, because I don't think he could just imagine carrying on going to his classes with his beloved there and not being able to be together. And so that he joined the Navy. That sort of run away to sea. That was the kind of thing that you do, is like going off to join the French Foreign Legion. I'll go to join the Navy, go to sea, and leave it all behind. So he volunteered. He wasn't drafted into the Navy. I think he had they still had conscription, I think, in those days in the US. But if you were a university student, you could wait until you finished your degree. But he stepped out of the degree and signed up for the Navy, just to get away from the situation. And so I think, again, you can ask him yourself, but I think he actually did meet up with his former beloved many, many years later, that they exchanged letters, and she found out he was a monk, and they had some correspondence. I mean, as a middle-aged woman, and he was already been a monk for 20 or 30 years, but they didn't lose touch altogether. But it was, one of those things that it's a painful cause that has a very beneficial result. Sometimes it's the most difficult and challenging aspects of our life that bring about the most sort of beneficial changes. We'd never ask for a heartbreak or a crisis in our life, like a serious illness or a death in the family or some such. But often it's those tragedies that push us out of our the ordinary confines of our lives. Also, he talks about his, and I'm not sure if he addresses it later on in the interview, but he was a very devout Christian. He actually had conversations with the bishop. He was an Episcopalian, that's the Church of England in the US. He had conversations with the bishop about the possibilities of training to be an Episcopalian priest. He was thinking of that. So he was a very serious Christian, but he had a lot of doubts, and so that I think that that was in those sort of late teen years when he was a young student at the University of Washington. Then he still had that aspiration. Maybe after he'd finished his language degree, he'd go into the ministry. But then, with the breakup with his Japanese girlfriend and the mounting doubts, why did God make me fall in love with this person if he doesn't allow me to marry her? Those kind of things. Again, you can make a note of these issues and ask him yourself. Oh, by the way, his travel plans have changed, and he's now due to come on the 20th. So they've cancelled the various events in the Northeast, so they brought their ticket forward. So just about 2 weeks from now, he should be here. Any other questions on that first part? If you can wait for the microphone. Yeah.
Just on a similar line, is it true that he did get married to somebody later
Yes, when he was at Berkeley, he was married for about 2 years. As he put it, one really good year and one really bad year. When he was a graduate student at UC Berkeley, and he was studying Asian history. I think he was doing his master's thesis was on Gandhi. And so he was doing Asian history. He got married to an American woman, and they lived in San Francisco. He was studying in Berkeley, but they had an apartment in San Francisco. He showed me where it was. It's right near Dolores Park, if you know San Francisco. Because that was where I lived. That was a really bad time. I think the Dolores Park stint, that was a difficult time. But so they divorced after 2 years. She is a poet, and again, he's after a number of years as a monk. Then he got back in touch with her, and I think before he took his Upasampada, he wrote to her with a sort of asking for forgiveness letter. And that his preceptor said, "If you've got any unfinished business or anyone that you feel that you've had difficulties with, it's good to ask for forgiveness." And you can, again, wait till Luang Por's here. He can confirm the stories. But I think what happened was that he wrote to her and didn't hear anything back for about 10 or 12 years. And then when he was already back, I think when he was back in England, then a letter reached him from her saying, "This has taken me a while, but I forgive you. Please forgive me too." That kind of thing. So that there was a kind of rapprochement. But again, I think that the painfulness of that experience of marriage was another of the things that made him very interested in meditation. And following that up, when he joined the Peace Corps, he was in the very first group of trainees in the Peace Corps. Peace Corps was launched by John F. Kennedy, and then he was in training in Hawaii for that first tranche of Peace Corps volunteers when Kennedy was assassinated. So he heard about that when he was in the Peace Corps training, 1963. So then so he'd left the marriage by that time. That was over, and he was very interested in meditation. So he had encountered Buddhism through reading D.T. Suzuki when he was in the Navy, and then had followed that up just by reading books. And then he was particularly inspired by the Charles Luke books, Chan and Zen Training. There's a series of 3 books published by Charles Luke, and one of them had a set of Dhamma teachings by Master Shu Yun from a retreat that he led in Shanghai in 1954, when he was, I think, 114 years old when he led that retreat. And in that retreat, it's very Charles Luke is quite thorough in the account and quite accurate. So he spells out quite in some detail the method of investigating the question, "Who am I?" as a meditation method. So that was what Luang Por Sumedho used as his main meditation practice when he was in the Peace Corps, and then also a lot of the time when he was in Nong Khai and when he first went to Wat Pah Pong. So he was using that. The instruction from those Charles Luke books from the great master Shu Yun. Okay, so I'll continue with part 2. So then Roja starts off. I'd like to read you something from Krishnamurti concerning tradition. He says, "To carry the past over to the present, to translate the movement of the present in terms of the past, destroys the living beauty of the present. There is nothing sacred about tradition, however ancient or modern. The brain carries the memories of yesterday, which is tradition, and is frightened to let go because it cannot face something new. Tradition becomes our security, and when the mind is secure, it's in decay. One must take the journey unburdened, sweetly, without any effort, never stopping at any shrine, at any monument, or for any hero, social or religious, alone with beauty and love." That's Krishnamurti in The Only Revolution. That's the end of the quote there. Now, and then Roger carries on. "Now, your and Sujito's presence here has been an obvious display of the carrying on of a tradition that has existed for over 2,500 years. Concerning this quotation, I wonder if one could get too caught up in the form, missing the intended purpose. Or, another way of stating it, how does one avoid getting caught up in form?" Luang Por responds, "Well, it's like driving a car. One could dismiss the convention of a car and say, I'm not going to depend on that because it's from the past. So I'll just walk on my own to New York City, which is a long walk from Barre, Massachusetts. Or I'll invent my own car because I don't want to copy someone else and take something that is from the past and bring it into the present. I could do that, and maybe I would succeed. I don't know. The point is not so much in the vehicle that's used, but in getting to New York City. Whether one goes slowly or quickly, one should take what is available, whatever vehicle one finds around. If there isn't any, invent one or just walk. One must do the best one can. But if there is one already around, why not learn to use it, especially if it's still operable? Tradition is like that. It's not clinging. One can also cling to the idea that one does not need tradition, which is just another opinion or view. Those of you who are familiar with Krishnamurti and the sort of dynamics of his teaching, he did end up in quite a sort of heroic position, very much sort of with the people in awe, and with good reason. He's an incredibly wise person, but even though he would say, like, don't put me up on a pedestal, don't worship me. People would say, oh, we love the way we love the way that you tell us not to worship you. It's like rather like in the life of Brian, when Brian is telling them to get lost and go away, that they worship him for the very fact that he's telling them to get lost. Oh, he must be a great enlightened master because he's telling us to get lost and go away. So it was an ongoing dynamic with Krishnamurti. He really tried his best to not use form and not develop traditions, but that is how we operate as human beings. And so what Luang Por is pointing to is that it's the skillful use of form, and that example of a vehicle is one that I've used over and over again from hearing him speaking in this way, but also it's certainly the form of getting into a car. It's limiting. Yes, you have to sit in a box and not move, and so it's limiting. You're strapped in, and you can't wander around. Your movement in the vehicle is limited. Yes, but by being strapped into the vehicle, then it enables you to travel much greater distances with much greater ease and much more convenience. So, in exactly the same way, the skillful use of the form, it's a vehicle, and over the years, Luang Por Sumedho would be quite vigorous in his discouragement of people getting stuck on the form of monastic life or in the forms of Buddhism as a lay practitioner, and could be very, very forthright. And I remember in the early days of Amaravati, him saying, I think it was before the temple was built, and when we were having teachings either in the sala or the retreat center shrine room, that era, he'd say, the last thing I would want is to turn you into a bunch of bloody Buddhists, like it was some sort of horrible infection, some kind of ghastly accident that would happen to you, that if you became a Buddhist. Perish the thought. Because, and then often when people were requesting to enter into the monastic life as a nun or as a monk, as an anagarika, yeah, he would, over and over again, he would emphasize, you're not taking on the robes as an identity. It's a vehicle, it's a skillful means. If you think you're putting on the robes in order to be a monk or be a nun, you've got completely the wrong idea. It's not an identity, it's a skillful means. And that he said, if I thought you wanted to become a monk in order to be a monk, I wouldn't give you a pasampada. I wouldn't offer ordination. It's those kind of things he would say, which for some people would be like, oh, but I really want to be a monk. and he'd walk you through it. He'd say, well, it's not a matter of not using the robes or not being respectful and sincere in the practice of the Vinaya discipline, but it's how you relate to the form, to the robes, the Vinaya discipline, the structures of our daily life. That's the point of it. If you think it is what you are, as in a sense of being, then you've missed the point. It's not an identity, it's a skillful means, an upaya. So then Luang Por goes on to say, Quotations like that are tremendously inspiring, but they're not always very practical, because one forms another opinion that traditions are wrong or harmful. The problem, you see, I'm sure Krishnamurti must realize this, does not lie in the tradition, but in the clinging. So that you can cling to the idea, that you can cling to the opinion that traditions are wrong or harmful. So then you're still clinging. You're clinging to a kind of anti-tradition rather than a pro-tradition. The problem does not lie in the tradition, but in the clinging. This body is a conventional form that came from the past. The language that we use, the world we live in, and the societies we're a part of are all conventional forms that were born in the past. So one could say that one does not want anything to do with them, in which case one should stop talking completely. Krishnamurti should stop having books published. If you follow the logic, and I think Luang Por's his analysis of that and his expression of it is incredibly clear and acute. It's like, language comes from the past. It's formed over centuries, millennia, to be this. And so Krishnamurti is, in the act of using speech, he's using something from the past. Ta-da! And then Roger responds, he says to his listeners, Krishnamurti, I don't know why you buy these books. So Krishnamurti, he was, I think he was indeed very, very aware of the irony of having to use those forms in order to have an effect on others. But Luang Por Sumedho's point is very, very apposite, very appropriate. So Luang Por goes on to say, as we live in a conventional world, we live in a conventional world. It's not a matter of depending on conventions, but of learning how to use them skillfully. We can use language for gossip, lying, and becoming obsessed speakers. We can become perfectionists, fuss budgets with language. The important thing to understand is that language is communication. When I communicate something to you, I try to speak as directly and clearly as possible. It's a skill. But if my tongue were cut out, I would just learn to live without speaking. That's all. That would not be any great sorrow, but a bit of an inconvenience for some things. It might be convenient for many other things. Religious traditions are just conventions that can be used or not, according to time and place. If one knows how to use them through the tradition, one is much better off than someone who does not know, or who thinks that they are all just a waste of time. One can go to a Christian church, a Theravada monastery, or a synagogue and respect, get a feeling for the convention one finds there without feeling that it's bad or wrong. It's not up to us to decide about that. They are all based on doing good, refraining from doing evil. But if one clings to them, one is bound to them. If one regards religion as just a convention, one can learn how to use it properly. It's the raft that takes one across. And for those of you who are not familiar with that particular sutta teaching, this is one of the examples that the Buddha gives in his sort of classical simile, that when he talks about the Dhamma, he says the Dhamma is a raft that you use. If you're on one shore of the river, which is dangerous, and there's kind of wild animals or violent people, and there's peril and difficulty, then if you gather some sticks and vines and you bind them together, then you can make a raft, and then through your own effort you can paddle across to the other shore of the river, where it's safe and secure. There's no danger from wild animals or harmful people. And then the Buddha said, so once you've got to the other shore, the safe shore, is it appropriate, is it sensible to pick up the raft, put it on your shoulder and carry it around, saying, oh, this raft has been so helpful to me, this is the way I got across from the dangerous shore to the safe shore, therefore I should take it with me wherever I go? Is it wise to do that? Or rather, is it more sensible to recognize, well, this raft helped me to get across, but now I don't need it anymore, so I can just leave it here on the bank and go on my own way? And he says the Dhamma is exactly that way. So rather, one should regard the Dhamma teaching as a means to carry one across, and that once you've got to the safe shore, to the other shore, then you don't have to carry it around. It doesn't have to be something that is clung to as a burden. And so that is, I feel, an extraordinarily sort of clear and helpful analogy. Doesn't mean that you reject the Dhamma teachings or that you don't use them, but there is the attitude of say, non-clinging, non-grasping, non-attachment. And Roger goes on to say, you mentioned that traditions can be used according to the time and place. I noticed that you and Sujito go on alms round in Barry in the morning, which is Barry is a local town near IMS. On the one hand, I find this quite admirable. On the other hand, I wonder what kind of effect this has on a society that isn't Buddhist. To the average householder, a person wearing orange or red robes could be anything from a Hare Krishna devotee to whatever. Is following the tradition completely, at this time and in this place, doing more harm than good? Could it be offensive to these people? Would it have been offensive for me to go and listen to Krishnamurti at Sanan wearing my robes, which, in that context, I chose not to do? So Sanan is, I think, the Krishnamurti Center in Switzerland, and so in that Tibetan tradition, the monastics don't have any say limitations about changing out of their robes. If they feel it's appropriate, they can change into lay clothes and go about in lay clothes to work or to travel and such like. So that it seems like he went to go and listen to Krishnamurti at his place in Sanan, and it changed into lay clothes in order to go along to that. There's also a Krishnamurti Center, Brockwood Park, near Chithurst. So when he was giving teachings there, frequently the Sangha members would go from Chithurst to Brockwood Park to listen to Krishnamurti, and sometimes he would acknowledge this robed person in the group, and sometimes not. I didn't go along myself, but some people did. So then, this last piece from Luang Por, then his response is, well, the intention is good. The time is now, and the place is here. Some people will be upset. Some people will find it very nice. In England, it upsets some people, but sometimes people need to be upset. They need to be shaken up a bit, because people are very complacent in these countries. Also, going on alms round attracts good people who seem to like it. Since our intention isn't to shock or to harm, how my appearance affects others is their problem. I'm modestly covered and not out to lure them into any kind of relationship or harm them in any way. On the contrary, going on alms round gives them the opportunity to offer dana, if they're so inclined. In England, admittedly, most people don't understand it. Yet it seems to me that making the alms round is one of the religious conventions that is worth maintaining, because people in countries like this have forgotten how to give. It's like putting juice back into the religious body once again. It's getting monks moving within the society. When the Buddha was a prince, before he was enlightened, he left the palace and saw 4 messengers, quote unquote, who changed his life. The first one was an old man, the second one was a sick person, the third was a corpse, and the fourth was a monk meditating under a tree. I look on alms round as a message. I don't view it as a duty I have to perform, but just as a part of my life, the way I live my life. If people object and find it very wrong, if it causes people all kinds of problems, then I'll not do it. That has not happened yet. However, we can also assume too much. We can assume that people will not understand and therefore not give them a chance. When I went to England, many people thought that I should not go on alms round in the village near our monastery. They thought it was stupid. Some English people, as well as Buddhists, felt that we should adapt to the English customs. However, I decided to take things as they come. Rather than deciding whether or not I should adapt it to English customs, I simply followed the tradition and played it by ear. I felt it would take its own form accordingly. If one trims the tradition down before even planting the seed, one often severs or shrinks its whole spirit. The entire tradition is based on charity, kindness, goodness, morality. And I'm not doing anything wrong. I may be doing things that people don't understand. And Roger responds, in my own mind, and I imagine in the minds of others as well, the alms round might seem to be a type of clinging to form, to tradition. And Luang Por responds, then one isn't being mindful. It would be just clinging to a method, but it's still better than what most people cling to, isn't it? I'm not sure, says Roger. Is it possible to place a value judgment on clinging? However, how does one keep the mind awake day and night? When performing certain rituals, chanting or an alms round, how can one avoid the repetitive mechanical routine of our daily existence? So maybe I'll pause there. So that was one of the things that was very interesting about coming to England was when Luang Por Chah first decided that he would leave Ajahn Sumedho and Ajahn Kemadhammo, Ajahn Anando, Ajahn Viradhammo in London when he went back to Thailand in July of 77. He said, you can adapt things as you need to here. You can wear the robe over both shoulders if the weather gets cold. You can inside the monastery. You can change the chanting if you need to. But one thing that you must do is you have to go out on alms round every single day. And they were surprised, how he was quite adaptable in some respects, but he really laid down the law in terms of going on alms round. And they were a bit curious because they thought, well, there's only like one or two people who are really devoted monastery supporters who are sort of out there waiting for us, and other people don't know what we're doing. And Luang Por Chah said, it's your duty to fly the Buddha's flag. This is the banner of the Arahants, is the robe, and that your role is to be the fourth heavenly messenger. So whether or not people put food in your bowl is beside the point. Also, it's to stay locked up in your house and be afraid of interacting with society, then you're never going to do any good here. And even if nobody offers you anything, you're out in the world and people are seeing you. And as it turned out, that was how they got given the forest of Chithurst, because they were on an alms round where they was walking through Hampstead Heath, and some person who was jogging past stopped and engaged them in conversation and ended up giving them the Chithurst forest. On the alms round. Not on the alms round. It took a friendship had to develop first, but that was the first encounter, was on their Bindabat. So it was very, very worthwhile. So any questions or comments? The last section. Okay, I'll leave it there and I'll follow up on that. And we'll get onto the subject of rituals. Actually, I think tomorrow is the day before the One Pra. Is that correct? So I'll be meeting with the Anagarics tomorrow. So the next reading will be the day after One Pra. So not tomorrow or the day after, but the day after that we'll continue.